When I opened the front door of my mansion that evening, I froze. Standing on my porch was my brother Mark, and beside him was the last person I ever wanted to see, my ex-husband. For a moment, it felt like the world went silent. The wind was still, the sky was heavy, and I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I never thought I would see the two of them together again, not after everything they had done. It was strange how life worked, how the people who once broke you would always find their way back when you finally started to heal. 3 years ago, my life was very different. I was living in a small, comfortable house in Portland, Oregon. Back then, I thought I had everything I wanted: a husband who said he loved me, a family that cared, and dreams of a future that felt bright. Ethan used to tell me that we were a team, that he wanted to build a life together. I believed him. I trusted him more than anyone. Mark, my older brother, was my best friend growing up. After our parents passed away, we became even closer. I trusted him the way a sister should. He and his wife Lydia visited often. We would have dinners, talk about our future, and share stories late into the night. I thought we were a family that stood together. I was wrong. It started with small things. Ethan spending more time away from home, late-night phone calls he would quickly end when I entered the room, money that seemed to disappear without explanation. I tried to ignore it because I wanted to believe him. I told myself that he was working hard for us, that everything would make sense later. I didn't realize then that the people I trusted most were already weaving lies behind my back. I remember one afternoon when I asked Ethan if something was wrong. He smiled and said, "You worry too much, Raina. Trust me." And I did. I always did. Mark backed him up, saying Ethan was just under pressure from work. Lydia told me to stop stressing him out. It was like everyone was on his side, and I was the unreasonable one. But that day at my mansion, standing at the door with both of them in front of me, I could see the truth in their eyes. Ethan looked uncomfortable, like he knew he didn't belong there. Mark tried to smile, but it was weak and full of guilt. I didn't need them to say a word. I already knew why they were there. They needed something. I looked at them quietly, remembering every tear, every sleepless night, every moment they made me feel small. And for the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt calm. The same mansion they said I would never own now stood tall behind me, and they were the ones standing outside, waiting for me to let them in. It's funny how life turns. 3 years ago, I was begging them to stay. Now they were the ones at my door. After my mother passed away, I received a small inheritance. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to start the dream I had been holding on to for years, opening my own design studio. I had spent so many nights talking to Ethan about it, sharing my ideas and sketches, imagining how it could grow into something beautiful. He always smiled and said he believed in me. But when the time finally came, his tone changed. Ethan told me it wasn't the right time to start a business like mine. He said the market was unstable and that we should invest the money in something more practical. He had this new business idea, a small logistics company he wanted to start with a friend. He said it would double our money in just a few months. I was hesitant, but he sounded confident, and when Ethan talked about success, it was easy to believe him. Still, I wanted a second opinion, so I asked Mark what he thought. He told me Ethan's idea was solid and that he'd help him manage it. Mark said he'd seen the numbers and that it could really work. Hearing that from my brother gave me comfort. I thought if both of them were involved, it had to be safe. These were the people I loved and trusted most. I couldn't imagine them leading me wrong. So I agreed. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, pen in hand, signing the check. Ethan kissed my forehead and said, "You won't regret this, Raina." I smiled because I truly believed him. I believed in us. I believed in family. The first few weeks, everything sounded promising. Ethan came home talking about meetings, deals, and new clients. He was always on the phone, acting busy and stressed, which I took as a good sign. Mark backed him up whenever I asked questions, saying things were moving slowly but surely. Lydia told me to relax and stop worrying so much, that good things take time. But as the months went by, Ethan's updates started getting shorter. The smile he used to flash when he spoke about the business faded. Soon he stopped mentioning it at all. I started noticing bills piling up and his mood changing. When I asked what was happening, he got defensive and said I didn't understand how business worked. Mark stopped answering my calls, and Lydia brushed me off, saying I was being dramatic. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I told myself that maybe they just needed more time. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I felt the pit in my stomach grow heavier each day. Then one morning, Ethan sat me down and told me the business had failed. He said it was out of his control, that they had been cheated by suppliers and investors. I felt my chest tighten as I realized all my savings were gone. Every dollar I'd planned to use for my dream had disappeared, just like that. Ethan didn't even look sorry. He just said, "We'll figure it out," and walked away. Mark avoided me completely. Lydia stopped replying to my texts. And just like that, The people I thought I could count on most vanished the moment I needed them. At that time, I still didn't see it for what it really was. Not a mistake, not bad luck, but a setup. They had all played their parts. And I was the fool who believed love and family meant safety. It was Ethan's birthday, and I wanted to do something special for him. Things between us had been tense for a while, but I still believed we could fix it. I told myself that maybe he was just stressed from everything that happened with the business. So, I decided to surprise him at his office after work. I baked his favorite chocolate cake, packed a small gift, and drove there with a hopeful heart. I thought maybe, for once, things could feel normal again. It was late when I arrived. The building was quiet, and only a few lights were on. Ethan's office door was closed, but I could hear voices inside, soft, familiar voices. I smiled, thinking maybe one of his colleagues had stayed behind to celebrate with. I gently pushed the door open. What I saw next made my heart stop. Ethan wasn't alone. Lydia was there, my sister-in-law, my brother's wife. They weren't talking, and they weren't working. Her hands were around him, and his lips were on hers. The sound of the door creaking made them look up. For a moment, time froze. Ethan's eyes widened, and Lydia stepped back quickly, but the damage was already done. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, my breath caught in my throat. I stood there, clutching the small gift I had brought him, staring at the two people who had destroyed everything I believed in. Ethan started saying something, but his words didn't reach me. Lydia tried to speak, but I raised my hand and told her not to. I turned and walked out before my tears could fall. When I got home, I sat in the dark for hours. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold a glass of water. My mind replayed that moment over and over. Ethan's face, Lydia's face, the look of guilt they tried to hide. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited for morning, waiting for it to all feel like a bad dream. But when the sun came up, it still hurt just the same. The next day, I went straight to my brother. I needed him to hear it from me before anyone else. I told him what I saw, my voice breaking with every word. He didn't look shocked. That's when my heart broke all over again. He already knew. He didn't even try to deny it. He just sighed and said, "You pushed her away, Reina. She needed someone to talk to." His words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Instead of defending me, my own brother blamed me for what his wife had done. I stood there, staring at him, realizing that he wasn't on my side anymore. They had all chosen each other. Ethan, Lydia, and Mark, the people I trusted most, had stood together while I stood alone. That night, I packed a small bag and left the house. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Everything I loved had turned against me, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be completely alone. The weeks after I discovered Ethan and Lydia together felt like living through a storm that never ended. Ethan didn't even try to apologize. Instead, he acted like I was overreacting, like what I saw didn't mean anything. A few days later, he handed me divorce papers. There were no discussions, no explanations, just cold, signed documents. It felt like he had been waiting for that moment, like he had already planned how to get rid of me. When I saw Mark's name listed as a witness for Ethan, my heart sank. My own brother had agreed to help him. In court, Mark said things that painted me as unstable and controlling. He claimed Ethan had tried to make our marriage work, that I was the one who made things difficult. Every lie he told hit me like a punch. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but Ethan's lawyer was prepared for everything. By the end, I had lost nearly everything: our house, my savings, and the little money I had left from my mother's inheritance. When the divorce was finalized, all I had was my car, a few clothes, and a heart full of emptiness. I went to Mark's house, hoping that at least my brother would let me stay for a while until I figured things out. Lydia opened the door, looked at me without a hint of guilt, and said, "It's better if you move on." She closed the door before I could say another word. I stood on the porch, trembling, realizing I truly had no one left. For the first time in my life, I had to start over completely alone. I found a small room for rent behind an old building. The wallpaper peeled off the walls, and the heater barely worked, but it was all I could afford. I spent most nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had fallen apart so fast. Some mornings, I didn't even want to get out of bed. But deep down, a small voice told me I couldn't stay broken forever. I started working at a real estate firm as an assistant. The pay was low, and the hours were long, but it was something. I worked double shifts, sometimes without taking a full meal, just to keep up with rent. Every time I drove through the nicer parts of town, I'd slow down to look at the big houses with perfect lawns and tall windows. I imagined living in one of them, not as someone's wife or helper, but as a woman who built her own success. Those quiet drives kept me going. Each luxury home I passed reminded me of what I wanted. Not revenge, not to make them jealous, but to prove that they couldn't destroy me. I wanted to rebuild my life from the ground up and stand on my own. I wanted to look back one day and know that losing everything was the beginning of becoming stronger than I had ever been. One morning at the real estate firm, I was organizing some old property files when a woman walked in. She looked to be in her late 60s, graceful and confident, with a kind smile that immediately softened the. Her name was Diana Morgan. She had been a successful realtor for over 30 years before retiring, but she still visited the office now and then to help with special cases. She noticed me working late that day and asked why I was still there after hours. I told her I needed the extra pay. She gave me a curious look and asked about my story. For some reason, I opened up to her. I didn't tell her every painful detail, but I mentioned how I'd lost everything and was trying to rebuild my life. She didn't look at me with pity like others did. Instead, she nodded and said, "Then you're already halfway there, Raina. You're working, not waiting." Those words stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, Diana started talking to me more. She noticed my interest in real estate and how I paid attention to small details others ignored, things like property layouts, pricing trends, and what clients wanted. One afternoon, she asked if I wanted to learn the business properly. I said yes without thinking twice. She began mentoring me personally. After work, we would sit in her office and she'd explain everything: how to value homes, negotiate with buyers, and handle clients with confidence. She taught me how to see potential where others saw nothing. It wasn't easy. I made mistakes, got frustrated, and sometimes doubted myself. But Diana never lost patience. She said, "The difference between people who succeed and those who don't isn't luck, it's consistency." Her faith in me changed everything. Within a year, I earned my realtor's license. Diana and I decided to start a small business together. We called it Morgan and Ray Property. She had the experience, and I had the hunger to grow. We worked hard, day and night, weekends included. Slowly, the business started to grow. Our first sale was a small suburban home, but it felt like a castle to me. I remember standing outside after the deal closed, holding the commission check and crying. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I was no longer the broken woman who had once been left with nothing. After that, things moved fast. Clients began to trust us. Our name started spreading. Within 2 years, we became one of the top property firms in Oregon. I bought my first home, a cozy townhouse by the lake, then another as an investment. Every time I signed my name on a deed, it felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. Then one day, I saw it, the mansion I had always dreamed of. White pillars, wide windows, a view that overlooked the city skyline. It was everything I used to imagine during my hardest days. I bought it in full, no loans, no help, just me. When I signed the papers and saw my name on the deed, I didn't cry. I just smiled. That house wasn't just a dream come true. It was my victory, a silent promise to myself that I had made it, not because of anyone else, but because I refused to give up. It had been a few peaceful months since I moved into the mansion. Life had finally started to feel calm again. I spent my mornings on the balcony, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over the hills. The silence that used to feel lonely now felt peaceful. I finally had everything I'd worked for: a beautiful home, a growing business, and the strength to stand on my own. But peace doesn't always last forever. One evening, the doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, the past was standing right there. It was Mark, my brother, the man who had once stood against me in court and helped Ethan take everything I had. I barely recognized him. His hair was messy, his clothes were wrinkled, and he looked thinner, older. The confidence he always carried was gone. He stood there with trembling hands, eyes red, and said quietly, "Raina, please, I need your help." For a few seconds, I just stared at him. It felt strange seeing him there, the same brother who shut me out when I needed him most. Now he was the one standing outside, looking lost. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the foyer, glancing around at the tall ceilings, the marble floors, and the warm lights. I could tell he was trying to hold back his emotions. We sat in silence for a moment before he started talking. His voice shook as he told me everything. His business had gone bankrupt after a series of bad deals. He said Lydia had left him for someone else, taking whatever money was left in their account. Ethan, who had once been his partner in those investments, had vanished completely, leaving him with nothing but debts. He broke down crying right there in the middle of my living room, the same man who had once testified against me without a hint of guilt. Watching him like that didn't bring me joy. It didn't make me feel powerful. It just made me realize how much had changed. I wanted to feel angry, but instead I felt calm, distant even. Maybe because I had already cried all the tears I had for him years ago. I listened as he begged me for a loan, saying he had no one else to turn to. He kept repeating, "You're all I have left." The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. When he finished talking, I looked at him quietly. "I remember when I said the same thing to you once," I said softly. He lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't shout, I didn't insult him, and I didn't throw him out. I just told him I needed time to think. As he left, I stood at the door, watching him walk down the long driveway. A part of me wanted to forgive him, but another part of me knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Revenge didn't need to be loud or cruel. Sometimes it was just standing tall while the people who once broke you finally faced the weight of their choices. A few days after Mark's visit, I got a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered and heard the voice on the other end, I almost laughed. It was Ethan. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since the divorce. Hearing his voice again felt strange, like a ghost from a life I'd buried long ago. He sounded too casual, too confident, like nothing had ever happened between us. He said he was in town and wanted to see me. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his tone smooth and familiar. "We should talk. Maybe over dinner?" I could hear the fake charm in his voice, the same tone he used when he wanted something. I didn't ask how he got my number because I already knew. Mark must have told him. The timing was too perfect. I stayed quiet for a moment, then simply said, "Fine. Come by if you want to talk." Part of me wanted to see what kind of man he had become after all those years. I wanted to look him in the eyes and see if he still carried that same arrogance. When he arrived at my mansion, he stepped out of his car looking exactly the same, well-dressed, confident, and wearing that same smug smile that used to fool me. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I watched him walk up the stairs, and all I could think was how small he looked now against the backdrop of everything I had built. He looked around the house with wide eyes, pretending to be impressed. "So, this is your place?" he asked, his voice light but full of hidden envy. "You've done well for yourself." "Yes," I said calmly. "I have." He gave a little laugh, the same one he used when he was trying to charm me. "You know, Reina, maybe we could start over. You and me. We were always meant to build an empire together. I made mistakes, but I've changed." His words might have worked on me once, but now they only reminded me of how far I'd come. I looked at him and said quietly, "We did build an empire, Ethan. You built yours on lies. I built mine on lessons." He froze. For the first time, he didn't have a quick comeback or a fake smile. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for a way to make me doubt myself again. But there was no space left for his lies here. I walked toward the door and opened it. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said simply. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, but I didn't wait. I closed the door before he could take another breath. The sound of it shutting felt final, like closing the last chapter of a book I never wanted to reread. As I stood there, the house quiet again, I felt no anger, no sadness. Just relief. He had once taken everything from me, but now he couldn't take a single thing. Not my peace, not my success, not even my time. About a month after Ethan's visit, I was at the office going through new client files when my assistant walked in and said a woman was waiting in the lobby for an interview. We had been looking to hire a new sales manager, so I told her to send the applicant. I didn't look up right away as I was still reading, but when I finally raised my head, my breath caught for a moment. Standing in front of me was Lydia. She looked different from the woman I remembered. Her hair was dull, her clothes wrinkled, and her confidence was gone. She looked nervous, holding her purse tightly, her eyes darting around the office. For a second, I thought she didn't recognize me, and honestly, I preferred it that way. She smiled awkwardly and said, "Hi, I'm here about the position." Her voice shook slightly, and I could tell she was trying to sound professional, but there was fear behind her word. I stayed quiet and gestured for her to sit. She sat across from me, still not realizing who I was. I let her speak first. She explained that she had recently lost her job at another agency and was looking for a fresh start. She said she was willing to work hard, even take a lower position, just to get back on her feet. Every word she spoke felt like something out of a story I had lived years ago. Only this time, the roles were reversed. As she talked, I watched her closely. I remembered how she once looked at me with smugness, whispering behind my back, laughing when my life fell apart. I remembered how she shut the door on me when I went to her house after the divorce. Now she sat there in front of me, asking me for a chance. When she finally paused, she glanced at the nameplate on my desk. Her eyes stopped moving, and I saw the realization spread across her face. Reina Morgan," she whispered. Her lips parted slightly as the color drained from her cheeks. I could see her trying to form words, but nothing came out. She looked at me like she had just seen a ghost. I leaned back in my chair and gave her a polite smile. Not bitter, not cruel, just calm. "It's Reina Ray now," I said softly. "And no, we're not hiring." The silence that followed was heavy. Lydia blinked a few times, her mouth opening like she wanted to apologize, but I didn't let her. I stood up and walked her to the door. She tried to speak again, but I simply nodded and said, "Take care of yourself." As she walked out of my office, her shoulders slumped and her steps slow, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. I didn't need to humiliate her or remind her of what she'd done. Life had already done that for me. Watching her disappear through the glass doors, I realized that I didn't have to fight anymore. They no longer had power over me. The woman they once tried to break was now someone they couldn't even stand beside. That winter, the mansion finally felt like a home. For the first time since I'd moved in, it wasn't quiet or lonely. The halls were filled with laughter, music, and the smell of warm food. It was Christmas, and I had decided to host a small dinner. Not for show, not to impress anyone, but to celebrate peace. The kind of peace that comes after years of struggle. Diana was the first to arrive, carrying her famous apple pie. She hugged me like a proud mother and said, "You've come a long way, Reina." Her words warmed my heart. Soon after, a few close friends arrived, people who had been by my side through hard days and long nights. And then came James, someone who had quietly entered my life when I wasn't even looking for love. He was kind, steady, and nothing like Ethan. With him, I never had to prove my worth. The dinner table was simple but beautiful. Candles flickered softly, and the sound of laughter filled every corner of the room. Diana was telling old stories, James was teasing me about my terrible cooking skills, and my friends kept passing around desserts as if the night would never end. There were no fake smiles, no hidden motives, no people waiting to betray me. Just real warmth and genuine love. At one point, I stood up and walked out onto the balcony. The air was cold, and the city lights sparkled below like a sea of stars. I leaned on the railing and took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around me. Years ago, nights like this had felt lonely. I used to look at the same city lights from my tiny rented room and wonder if I'd ever find happiness again. I'd cry quietly, thinking I wasn't enough, that maybe I deserved the pain for trusting the wrong people. But now, that silence felt completely different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, peaceful. I realized I had finally let go of everything that once hurt me. I didn't need apologies from the people who betrayed me. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had built my life with my own hands, surrounded by people who truly cared for me. As I looked back through the balcony doors, I saw Diana laughing, James smiling, and my friends enjoying themselves. The warmth from that sight filled me in a way I hadn't felt in years. That was when it truly hit me. I had lost everyone I thought I needed, but in return I gained everything I actually did. I smiled to myself, whispering a quiet thank you to the universe. The girl who once cried herself to sleep was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that sometimes, losing everything is just the beginning of finding yourself. A few weeks after the Christmas dinner, I came home to find a plain white envelope waiting in my mailbox. There was no return address, but the handwriting on it was familiar, shaky, but unmistakable. It was from Mark. For a moment, I just stood there, holding it, unsure whether I wanted to open it. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I had the strength to read his words. Still, I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and carefully opened it. The letter was short, only a few lines. "You were right," it began. "We lost everything we took from you. Ethan is gone, Lydia's gone, and I have nothing left. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart too." I stared at those words for a long time. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. I felt calm. There was no satisfaction in his pain, no joy in his loss. Just a quiet understanding that life had finally come full circle. What they had taken from me, my money, my peace, my trust, had destroyed them instead. And I didn't have to lift a finger. I folded the letter gently and walked upstairs to my study. On one of the shelves sat a wooden box I had labeled the past. Inside it were a few things I couldn't bring myself to throw away. My old wedding ring, a photo of my mother, a faded business card from Ethan's company. I placed Mark's letter on top and closed the lid. Then I locked it, knowing I'd never need to open it again. The mansion was quiet as I walked through the halls. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, painting the marble floors in gold. My bare feet made soft sounds against the floor, and for once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt alive, peaceful. Every corner of that house carried a piece of my journey, the pain, the struggle, the rebuilding, and the triumph. I stopped in the middle of the grand hallway, where the light was brightest, and whispered to myself, "They abandoned me when I was broken. Now, I built a world they can only watch from the outside." The words didn't come from bitterness. They came from strength, from truth. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Not toward Ethan, not toward Mark, not even toward Lydia. They were all chapters of a story that had ended. What remained was me, whole, free, and standing tall in the life I had built on my own. As I looked out the window at the quiet hills beyond, I felt a deep stillness settle in my chest. Freedom didn't roar, it whispered. It wasn't revenge that brought me peace, it was letting go. And in that quiet moment, I finally knew I was free. Dove.